Hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of A Week Past Sunday with me, David Hooks. Sorry I've been off for the last 2 weeks, it's been a holiday, but we've just got time for a quick recap of the last week. Now, this week in First Minister's Questions, Kezia Dugdale once again took a good point and ruined it with her ridiculous hyperbole. Now, time and again, the Labour leader has come to the chamber with a valid line of attack on government policy and managed to look a fool by overplaying the point. How many times can she say, when will this First Minister start doing her job? Or when will the First Minister wake up and realise she's failing the poorest in Scotland? All she does with this is allow Nicola Sturgeon to either avoid the major complaint or skim over it with a long and detailed response of all the myriad of things her government are doing in a given area. Now, the most recent cancer statistics were released by IDS Scotland, and they make for mixed reading. Overall, the rates of mortality for various cancers have come down by just over 10% in 10 years, but the number of deaths has remained almost static. Now, this is a reflection of the population growth among the elderly, and the fact cancers are more common among the elderly. Now, Dugdale claimed that poorer people were more likely to get cancer than rich people, and put on her pained wee face to ask why Nicola Sturgeon was letting down the poorest in society. Now, it is right to say that those from the most deprived areas are more likely to develop cancers in general, but there are a few things we need to understand before we can really comprehend what these stats are telling us. Week after week on various topics, Kezia Dugdale tries to pitch the rich against the poor and constantly quotes statistics which supposedly show poor people being less likely to achieve. The attainment gap is something I wanted to talk about previously, the difference between the achievement levels of those in the most deprived areas versus the least deprived areas. Even the figures quoted on university applications use the same terminology. So what's it all about? Well, the statistics which are quoted on these same subjects, cancer incidence, attainment, further education applications and educational outcomes, are based on the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, or SIMD. And once you understand what that is and what it means, the figures start to make a lot more sense, because the SIMD is not a measure of affluence, but of multiple deprivations. It's a statistical model which measures the relative deprivation of the areas of Scotland using a wide range of deprivation measures. There are 7 areas in total: employment, where they look at the claimant count; education, where they look at pupil performance and skills and training; in health, they look at A&E admissions; general health; in income, they look at benefit recipients, dependents, and access to services, they look at travel times; for crime, they look at crime rates; and in housing, they look at housing conditions. So as you can see, this is not a measure of affluence, although that is a factor, and the reports are at pains to emphasise this, yet Kezia Dugdale and Labour continually conflate the most deprived areas with poorest people, families, or in relation to education, kids. You may have heard on First Minister's Questions when Kezia Dugdale asks about the poorest kids, Nicola Sturgeon's answer references the most deprived areas. Well, what is a deprived area? What does the measure actually mean? So Scotland is broken up into small areas of roughly 800 people over what would generally take about an hour to walk around. There are 6,976 areas in total, and the SIMD tries where possible to deal with individual data, but generally it measures the deprivation factors affecting a given geographical area, not individuals. This leads them to say, not everyone who lives in a deprived area is deprived, and not all deprived individuals live in deprived areas. The data from each of these areas is consolidated, collated and weighted, and score assigned to each area. Now, those 6,976 areas are then put on a data scale of 6,505, with 1 representing the most deprived or lowest weighted score and the least deprived on 6,505. These are then split into quintiles, or 20% chunks, and the areas that make up the lowest 20% are considered the most deprived, with the top 20% being least deprived. So it's important to recognise that a poor person can be living in one of the least deprived areas and still experience multiple deprivation. So to constantly conflate those from the most deprived areas with the poorest in society is at least disingenuous. If you look at the total number of cancer deaths from non-melanomas, the figure is around 15,000. And of those, roughly 4,000, or almost a third, were from smoking-related cancers of the lung and throat. Statistics show that those from deprived areas, are more likely to smoke. So it's almost no surprise that more of them die from lung cancer. But when you look at the figures from skin cancer, the incidence is far higher in those from the least deprived areas. So does that mean that Nicola Sturgeon is letting down rich people by not stopping them from going on holiday or taking a sunbed? There are many risk factors that contribute to any incidence of cancer, but when you think about how the figures are calculated, the areas of greatest deprivation are, by definition, those with the highest risk factors. Less access to healthcare, less chance of good employment, poor housing conditions, poorer diets. The fact that incidence of cancers among the most deprived areas is higher is, in essence, a vindication of the SIMD model. It's the same with the educational attainment figures and all the other government figures that use this model. It accurately reflects the fact that no single factor is enough to guarantee success, but Dugdale always wants to simplify it to rich versus poor. Now that might suit her argument, but it's not very conducive to social cohesion or actually achieving anything. Raising the overall standard of areas is the key to giving individuals the routes to success, not just throwing money at it or throwing accusations that poor people are bad parents. Now, let's look at a couple of bits of news in brief. There was a cash for votes on fox hunting scandal with the SNP, where they found themselves accused of taking a bribe of £10,000 in return for agreeing to vote on fox hunting. Well, to be fair, that accusation came from the Herald, and it was backed by a statement from Murdo Fraser, the Conservative Party's answer to Jackie Baillie. He suggested the SNP had questions to answer on this cash for vote scandal, quite apart from the fact that there was no actual vote and the money was donated weeks after the proposed vote. The same article even has a one-line statement that the same body gave the same amount of money to Labour a month later, but apparently that wasn't a bribe. The SNP have over 100,000 members who pay membership fees every month. Do we really think that they would take a bribe of £10,000? That's up to you. The Lords this week put the progress of the Scotland Bill on hold until such time as the fiscal framework is agreed and they can assess how that affects the block grant. Both Scottish and UK governments have been negotiating the replacement for the Barnett formula, or Barnett 2, whatever it happens to be. And we're all aware that Barnett being kept was part of the infamous vow. But the thing is, keeping Barnett and introducing the new tax and welfare powers are mutually exclusive. Barnett is obsolete, and we should be clear that not only will it have to be scrapped as part of the fiscal framework, but that it really should be. As the importance of Barnett diminishes and the Scottish Government becomes responsible for more of its spending and tax-raising powers, however limited they may be, the voters will become more aware of who gets their money, who spends it, and how well they spend it. Finally tonight, the main story is on the Paris attacks, terrorism and the Islamist shitebags. Who or what are IS? We've all seen the pictures of them waving machine guns and driving around in their Toyota Hilux vans. But what is it they want? Where did they come from? Why the hell does anyone join them? Well, they started out as a fairly bog-standard Islamist extremist group called Jamaat al-Tawhid and Jihad, led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Now, forgive me for any terrible pronunciation here, I apologise. In 2004, they became an Al-Qaeda franchise and renamed themselves Al-Qaeda in the Land of the Two Rivers, or Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Remember, Iraq only came into existence after the First World War and the fall of the Ottoman Empire. In 2006, they and other jihadist groups came together to form the Islamic State of Iraq. The group remained an Al-Qaeda franchise and had an Iraqi leader. During the occupation, the group carried out numerous bombing campaigns and wrought terror wherever they could, even among their own groups. Now, as many of you may know, there are Sunni and Shia Muslims, and IS are Sunnis, or a version of. Sunni Islam is roughly translated as orthodox, and the difference between the two groups comes from a disagreement 1400 years ago as to whether Muhammad's brother-in-law or father-in-law should be his successor. Fairly typical religious splinter group stuff, but the Shia Muslims are a minority, making up about 20% of the world's Muslim population. Now, IS would seek to kill anyone who is not their kind of Muslim, and that not only includes the Shias, but part of their aim is to wipe out the Shia. So the IS group were brutal and bloodthirsty even by Islamist standards, and they indiscriminately killed anyone, and deliberately attacked Sunni Muslims in order to incite sectarian violence and distrust between groups. It's a classic divide and conquer technique, but there were still many in Iraq who were supportive of the group and their aims. That support began to wane due to their methods, and in the Anbar awakening in 2006-2007, coupled with the 2007 surge of US troops in Iraq, the organisation was severely damaged. Over the next years, their capabilities were reduced, which culminated in the deaths of the group's top two leaders in April 2010. However, following the withdrawal of the US troops from Iraq, the group took on a new and even more militant leader called al-Baghdadi. The new leader used the Syrian civil war to push into Syria just at the time when some of their Iraqi positions were being weakened due to local resistance. There was a similar story in Syria though, with some local groups being glad of the help from IS, only to subsequently find them assassinating their own leaders. This is a group who even other Islamist militant groups can't stand because they refuse to talk. They're not interested in talking. They're only interested in creating an Islamic state and having their caliphate, presumably with al-Baghdadi as Muhammad's new successor. And this is part of what makes them genuinely dangerous. They aren't just your average run-of-the-mill psychopaths. They actually have a goal, an endgame and a strategy. They currently control an area roughly the size of Scotland, and they even have their own currency. But I'll let you make your own jokes on that one. They run the police service, they tax people, they have an education programme, which to be fair probably only involves reading the Quran over and over and being told by them what it means. But this group has lofty ambitions. There have been more examples recently of local populations rising up against them. And this is where the whole argument of whether Muslims should be apologising for the actions of IS comes into stark relief, because ordinary Muslims are the ones being persecuted by IS. They are the ones having their religion hijacked and some dafty's interpretation of what God meant to say being forced on them. They are policed by people who only recently converted to Islam and are telling them, who have been Muslim all their lives, how to be a good Muslim. Now look, I'm atheist. I would be one of the first up against the wall come the glorious Islamic revolution, because people like me are dangerous. I don't have the luxury of blaming a 1400-year-old or 2000-year-old book if I want to be a bigoted murdering arsehole. I can't justify hating gay people by pointing to some obscure passage in an ancient manuscript and using a modern interpretation of it. No, I have to take responsibility, not just for my own actions, but for my moral views. I have to be able to back that up intellectually. Which is why I don't hate any one group. It's why I support gay marriage, and why despite the fact I think they're all utterly deluded, I still would fight for someone's religious freedom. These people, however, only have their book and their hatred. They ignore the passages of the Quran that speak of forgiveness and love, they ignore the parts about understanding your fellow man, and they concentrate solely on the bits that suit their aims, just like every other religious nutter in history. Now look, Islam is not a religion of peace, nor is it a religion of war. It's the same as Christianity. It's neither a good religion nor a bad one. Neither is Buddhism. There are Buddhist monks out there right now beheading people in the name of peace. Religion is what you make it, and unfortunately religion makes you susceptible to suggestion. You have to suspend part of the rational bit of your brain in order to believe things like a talking burning bush, walking on water, flying to heaven and back on a donkey, or splitting the moon. Once you head down that path, you find you're open to other suggestions, and if you're someone who is already vulnerable or suggestible, you can be persuaded to do things you would never dream of, like blowing yourself up in a crowded place. IS are a misogynist and backwards group of fuckwits and sociopaths who are acting like an episode of The Following gone badly wrong. They're fascists and control freaks who have a power lust and an almost childlike attitude to the world. The magazine they produce may be slick looking, but is full of the most appalling drivel and some of the worst writing I have ever been forced to read. It was impossible to get through it all, but to give you a flavour, they call the shitebags in Paris knights, which would be hilarious if not for the circumstances. They praise the downing of a Russian jet, yet claim it was originally supposed to be an American airline, but that they changed the target at the last minute. It doesn't contain images of their actions, nor does it show the solidarity in Europe after their pussy-esque attack in Paris. Indeed, there is a suggestion in the magazine that none of these actions are centrally planned, they just take the credit for them. These people will not be beaten by bombs. The only thing that will achieve is killing more civilians and creating the circumstances for more recruits. They will be beaten by showing them to be the brutal and hate-filled fucktards that they truly are, and by supporting the people in the regions who want rid of them. The US surge almost wiped them out last time, and whether Western leaders want to admit it or not, only something similar will achieve the aim of getting rid of them once and for all. Now, their ideology requires the West to fight them, which is why they taunt us. They want us to turn on each other, and they need us to hate other Muslims in order to justify their hatred. The best way to deal with these bullies is the same way as with any other lot. Get on with your life, laugh at them, and get your mates to beat the shit out of them when you can. But one of the most crucial things that we can do as a society is not turn on the Muslim population and start blaming them for something that has absolutely nothing to do with them or their religion. If you're Catholic, would you apologise for the KKK when you don't agree with them and have nothing to do with them? Anyway, thanks very much for watching. That's my show for tonight, and I'll hopefully be with you again next week. Take care and good night.